Welcome back to the Illicit Feminine. I am your host, Elizabeth Marth, and I am here today with my beautiful friend, Michèle Heffron. I'm so honored to be sharing space with Michèle. Michèle is, I'm going to read from her bio. She is a life, relationship, and divorce coach. She is a transformational life and relationship coach who supports individuals through some of life's most defining moments. From navigating the complexities of divorce to rediscovering identity after long-term partnerships, empty nesting, or career shifts, Michèle offers compassionate, strategic guidance through every phase of relationship transition. Her work is grounded in lived experience. She's also a certified Calling in the One coach, and she works with individuals and groups who are ready to shift internal patterns and heal emotional wounds and become available for authentic, lasting love. Through her podcast, Getting to the Heart, Life, Relationships, and Divorce, Michèle engages thought leaders, healers, and experts in intimate conversations that help listeners grow into their most courageous and connected selves. We're going to put links to her newsletter as well as her podcast and her website in the show notes. So please check out Michèle, as she is a wealth of information. And Michèle, I am so grateful and pleased and honored to have you on today.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, Elizabeth. It's such a gift to start my morning out with this today. So thank you.
Michèle and I go back a few years now, and she is just a light. We met at a retreat, actually.
Yeah.
The same place I met Wendy. You and Wendy Harrop had been friends before. Yes.
Just barely, actually. Yeah. And I have to say, and I'm pretty sure you might feel the same way, but that particular retreat was really among a standout from the multiple retreats I've been to over the years. And still to this day, the friendships and what I gained from that 3 days in Naples, Florida was just life-changing.
Agreed. It honestly set me on a different trajectory than I had been, and still just continuing on. And Michèle and I have been just so fortunate enough to travel together through this mastermind we were a part of and be in beautiful parts of Europe and in America and just have so much fun together. And I've learned so much from Michèle through Michèle. And I'm so excited for you all to hear Michèle's story today. So let's get started.
Thank you.
Michèle, take us back. There's so many good stories, right? This is the benefit of being with someone, having a conversation with somebody that like you've just had the pleasure to get to know. And I'm sure there's so many that I get to still hear. But take us back to the moment when things really shifted for you. If there's a moment, or if depending on where our conversation is going to go, but what's a moment that was really transitional for you?
Yeah. I sometimes forget just how much happened, because for me, there was this invisible erosion of what was going on in my life.
Yeah.
Because I had been married. I've been married twice and divorced twice. And the first one was a challenge because I learned some things much later in life about what was happening. And that was a big mystery. And maybe we'll get to that. But it was that second marriage. And it was that day I left, and I had a career before I got married. And then when I had my son, who was 10 at the time when I left, it was like that day. And I realized I had no bank account. I had no money or credit card. And I had some people who were around me that said, you have to get out of this. And there was like this little fire inside of me that says, you must go. You cannot stay here any longer. And I think that was that turning point. Now, I'm not saying it went easily after that, because for a long time, I felt like I was really pretending to be fine when I was really falling apart in so many ways. But I felt like, that duck analogy, when I was just paddling like a crazy ass woman underneath, and I was trying to look, oh, everything's fine up here. And that too is such a facade that we put on. And there was such a disconnect with how everybody else saw me, because I just really did appear to be very polished and very professional and really held it all together. But I didn't know what the hell I was going to do with my life. I didn't know. I couldn't go back to the career I'd had. I had been working with a large newspaper here in the Seattle area, a major newspaper. And by this time, the newspaper industry had really tanked. And I was in advertising and worked with high fashion advertisers back then, and they weren't advertising in the newspaper anymore. And anyway, I didn't know what I was going to do. And that's what started me on my trajectory to what went next. I knew I had to dive in, and I knew I wasn't going to be a statistic, and I knew I wasn't going to let my ex-husband win.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to give up on myself.
It's remarkable, right, what women do. I'm wondering if you would take us back a little bit, just for our listeners to understand the intensity, the dynamic a little bit between you and your second husband.
Yeah. So, a lot of it, and I didn't realize so much of it until long after, because from that point, I fell into some nonprofit work, and I was working with at-risk youth, and I was working with domestic violence prevention and support, and then relationship health education. And what was happening in our relationship, I learned later, I didn't even know what a narcissist was back then. And I learned about what narcissism looks like and the control that he had over me. When I met him, we were contemporaries. We were both professionals and the top of our game at what we were doing. And we were more of a power couple in that way. So I don't know that it was what I would call now a loving and committed relationship, but it was one that checked the boxes, right? And a lot of people can relate to this. You
Absolutely
get married and you get the house, and then you have the kids, and then you have a dog, and then you remodel the kitchen, and then you do the bathroom, and then all these kinds of things happen. But that's not what builds a relationship. And so what I was experiencing was this slow erosion over the money issues. So he completely took over all the money, and I didn't even know I didn't have access to it. He completely wanted to make sure that I was always in my place with everything. He would put me down in front of people and then turn everything around like I deserve this. It was this criticism constantly and this overbearingness. If I was sitting down, let's just say on a rare occasion, I would sit down, and he came home and I was reading a magazine on the couch or something, he would like, "What are you doing? Get up, do something." It was constant. Like, I don't know if you ever saw the film Mary Poppins. So I think it was like when Mr. Banks would come home, everybody would fly around the house and put everything away really quick. So when we knew he was coming down, when the kids and I knew he was coming home, I would like, everybody, books off the counters, puts everything away, close the garage door, make sure everything looks great. Because if he comes in the house and anything's out of place, he was going to just have a fit. And it was always like that. We were always on edge. And my father got to the point, even when we used to host holidays and dinner parties at our house, and my father got to the point where he said, "I'm not coming over there anymore."
Wow.
Yeah. He treats you like the hired help, and I'm not coming over there anymore.
Wow.
Yeah. So and then at the end, it got even worse when he realized that I was very serious about moving on with my life.
So you had shared that piece with him, like
I think he sensed it in a
subtly.
big way. So then all of a sudden he wanted to go in for marriage counseling. All of a sudden he wasn't Catholic. I was Catholic, and the kids went to Catholic schools and stuff. And decided to become Catholic, which I didn't want because I already knew that I was probably not going to be able to stay there. I didn't know how I was going to do this yet. I just knew there was this little seed up there. And then he started, I could see the financial pieces of it tightening up. And then he was tracking me. And then he was always wanting to know where I was every minute of every day. It was just like constant. And it was getting scarier and scarier, the control. And then I felt like I needed to be really secretive about stuff. So everything was just always on edge. It just never felt like anything was okay. And I remember he took me in an effort to win me back. And I wasn't gone, but I was in my head, I was
Emotionally
gone.
gone.
I was
Sure.
emotionally
Sure.
gone. And he took me on a trip to Sedona, and which would have been a really cool thing to do. But I was really fearful that he might actually try to harm me or even take me out. because he was financially focused. And what he had accumulated in his life was that was his treasure. And I just happened to be one of the jewels
Yeah.
along there. My parents thought he could have snapped to the point where he could have killed me. And what I learned later through all the work I've done in the space I've been involved in, especially in the place of domestic violence, is when people start to get down that path, it's not like there are violent people all the time or anything like that, but they can snap. And that often is what happens. And we were doing a hike up on those big, beautiful red rocks out in Sedona. And he wanted me to come over to the edge of this one, and there's no one around.
No, Sedona, you're
Right?
isolated when you're
You're
hiking and like, yeah,
nowhere.
absolutely.
I was like, no, I'm good. And I started heading back down the trail and just was like, I'm not putting myself into a position where I could potentially be lost and my kids would. I just was so in fear at that point of so much and so much unknown. And so when I finally knew that it was time to leave, it felt too painful to live under that pressure of what I was living through than to leap out into the unknown where I had no idea what I was going to do, but I knew somehow I was going to land on my feet.
Michèle, I really just want to take a moment and honor the piece, because it's like that strength that I believe women have inside of us, because as in that type of dynamic, in that type of relationship, and you are right, he's come on over to the side of the cliff. And right, it could have been an easy thing to be like, okay, just keep the peace. I'm going to go do this. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
And you really
Yeah.
just listened like to your intuition being like, nope, this isn't happening. I have 2 kids. Like, I'm more important. At the time that was happening, was that even like a completely conscious thing, or did you realize it more later?
I'm not exactly sure, but I think it was before this, or it might have been like right after. This is also the time when my real spirituality started to turn. And I was a runner. I was a very avid runner. I was a marathoner. And that's how my escape was back then. I would just run and run and run. And we lived down on a beautiful lake, and I was out running one morning, and we had a particularly challenging evening the night before, which involved some neighbors. And because we lived on a cul-de-sac and all the kids and everybody always did stuff. And it was this kind of an icky evening. And I didn't know what was going on because that night it was a particularly hard night. And this plays into the intuition part of it. So I was running and I was pissed and I was yelling at God, what the fuck is going on? Why are you doing this to me? Why is this happening? And I was yelling, it was raining, and it was like one of those scenes out of a silly movie. And I had this, for a split second, this being next to me, and it just looked at me and it said, so you would see. And I was like, see what? I didn't get it at the time, but it started to sink in. And since that time, and I don't know if that's what happened to me that day up on the red rocks, or any other time, but it has come back many times as I've been learning more and more about me and how I contributed to the situation, where my responsibility was and all of that, which was very hard and painful thing to have to understand. I also have seen more and more about what this all means for me and what my purpose in life is. And that's where it stemmed.
So I want to get into 2 pieces, because I think you just named a really important part of the work that both you and I do. I believe you did it before, and then Michèle in the past year became certified as a Calling in the One coach, and Catherine Woodward Thomas is the author of both Conscious Uncoupling and Calling in the One. And in her work, a primary component is, what is your part of any situation? Like,
Exactly.
It doesn't matter what it is. We are guided to look at what our part is. And as Michèle shared, as you can imagine, there are absolutely circumstances in which that can be very hard and painful. And so, Michèle, and I'll let you pick. I'd like to, if you are comfortable sharing with us, what were your discoveries of what your parts were? But I also Well, yeah, let's look at that first. Let's look at what were some of the discoveries of how unconsciously or subconsciously, I believe, you were showing up and
Yeah.
contributing in a non-conscious way to some of this.
That is such a great question because, as with this program, it's very deep and it takes some time to sort of. I would be honest, the first two times I read through the book, I had no idea what I was talking about. I had no idea even how to get to this kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
I really didn't. It was just perplexing to me. And I've gone through a lot of coaching certifications and all this. But what I realized, Elizabeth, there was the major component, and I had to see how it's woven through time because it didn't start with him, my husband at the time. And it didn't start with the one before that or any of the other relationships I had been in. It had started way back with my relationship, actually, with my mother, and how that started, what meaning I made of it, and how I was showing up in relationships. It was so interesting to see this. Is I'm very, what I guess what we would call love avoidant. And so I never really fully committed to anything. I thought I did. I pretended I did, but I didn't actually fully commit. And so my tendency in every single situation, and I could trace this back. I did this in jobs. I did this in school. I did it in so many places. And when things got a little rough, when it was varying degrees, my instinct was to bolt. I'm running. And then I was abandoning myself. So I guess what I do first is I invisible myself or abandon myself and play into everybody's things because I thought you had to earn it, because I had to earn my mother's love. And so I had to earn everybody's love. And I'm always trying to earn this and that. And so it was more transactional rather than really soulful, heartfelt kind of stuff. Everything was always floating along the surface for me.
Yeah.
And it kept it easier that way because that way I didn't have to face the stuff I was facing. And over the years, you build up a lot. And then I was that classic with the fog, fear, obligation, and guilt. I had that in a massively big way. So I was always like this, I can't do this because that would look bad. I was constantly trying to weigh things out. And I had to really look at this piece of it and how I allowed that to happen in my last relationship in particular, and how it got so bad because I was trying so hard to hold it together because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. I thought that was the thing I was supposed to do. And I was trying to follow all the logic of the time and what it was supposed to be. And what it just did is it just sucked the soul out of me until one day it was all around me and just said, look, you have got to do something different here. And that's actually when I hired a first coach.
I'm going to interrupt you a second because I want to hear about that. That's actually a perfect follow-up for my question. But I'm wondering if you will name, because I think so many women are going to be like, oh yeah, I get that. But I think it's important to put it in a contextual language. You're feeling like I have to do what I'm supposed to do, quote unquote. What is the hierarchy? Who are we pleasing here? Is it the mom? Is it your family? I mean, you come from a large family. You come from a large French Catholic family.
Yep.
So who were the players that were, even though I get probably at the time it was subconscious, but who are the players we're trying to please?
Yeah, I don't even know if it was subconscious. I think some of it was very conscious. Initially, who was I trying to please? Initially, of course, my mother and my parents, the larger family. I had been this very popular girl in school. I was like the head cheerleader for years. I was always on a homecoming court or something like that. I was very highly thought of, and it was fun, and I had a lot of fun, but I put an expectation on myself based on that. So there was, and I was still for many years and still to this day friends with so many people from back in that time that I was also trying to level up to them. Then there was the school families. So here I have my kids in this Catholic school, and I'm one of the moms who did it all and knew everybody. It was a smaller Catholic private school, and I felt like I had to hold it together for that. And then, of course, my husband at the time when it got to that point, it was like this complete guilt. Like I couldn't possibly do that. I mean, he would like, you're better off because you married me. And in a lot of ways, financially, I was.
Mhm.
And so it felt like everyone, even that you wouldn't, I don't even know if they do this anymore, but you would go out and you'd fill out a medical questionnaire or something, and they would want to know if you were divorced or not, or single. And I go, what difference does it make if I'm divorced or single? It's like, why would you put divorce as a category for your status? It made no sense to me. And so there always was this cloud of shame that I would have felt, especially, and this was a really big deal for me, having gone through it a second time. People will go, even now, oh, you've been married twice. You've been divorced twice. Yeah, why?
Scandalous, Michèle. It's
I
just
know. And I thought, wouldn't it be better to be free than to be caged up twice and
yeah.
learn something from it?
And to choose something better. And I don't mean an external circumstance. I mean like an internal way of being, like choosing that and learning and evolving and expanding versus staying stuck and small and in a status quo of something that is breaking you and possibly your children.
And definitely your children. I think it's such a myth that somehow you're meant to stay together for the family, because I don't know that's what's always in the best interest of the family. God never intended us to be miserable.
Never.
And I had something, but it was really, and I see this a lot now because it's been 15 years ago since that last one.
Okay.
And I've learned a lot even since that in relationships that I've been in, that I continue to learn about myself. And I want to do it well when I do it again. And so I'm really working in trying to find out where my patterns are, what contributes to things that don't work out well if I'm not even stating what my needs are, and being able to articulate things in a more constructive way. But with my kids, it's also shown them. So my son at the time when I went through that last divorce was 10 and my daughter was 20. And because I had a daughter from my previous marriage, and what it showed them over the years is that I don't display any animosity against my ex-husband. I don't subscribe to demonizing people or anything like that, because I don't think that really helps. And it has shown them that you can actually rebuild when you fall down, and it's okay. There's still time. I started my own business at 60 years old. I'm like, let's see how this goes. And so now they get to see that you're not done because something like this comes along in your life, that there's more out there for you. And I guess that's the unfolding that I've learned, Elizabeth, because I never could have seen that back then, because it looked like I was in a trench and I couldn't see over the top to see what else was possible.
You've put that so beautifully, because I think people can relate to that so well, regardless of whether it's within a marriage or your family or like a situation in life.
Exactly.
So what did it feel? Because I also feel like this is an important thing that you modeled for your children, who are now grown adults, but throughout the years. When you chose you, like when were you actively conscious that you chose you? And what did it feel like when you realized, I'm actually choosing Michèle?
Yeah. It took me some time to get there, because I had
Yeah.
a lot of old beliefs that I really had to do some serious dismantling on. And so, like earlier, I don't know, something said to me, do something and hire a coach. Now, I had started doing a lot of reading back then and trying to understand, what does it mean to expand and grow? And I think one of the early ones I read was by Jack Canfield. And I got a lot out of that book. And then I started reading some others. And I think around that time is when I was in this women's networking group, and this woman came and she was a coach. And I had one of my very dear friends had sold her really successful financial business and taken a year off and had gone to a coaching program. And she used me as a test. I didn't know what a coach really was back then. So this woman comes and I really connected with her, and I scraped together every little, and she didn't take credit cards. And I had to have the actual money to pay her. And I didn't know what it was all about. But when I started, I remember the very first session with her, and I went, oh my gosh, I think this is what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. And now it took years later for me to get to that point because I was still trying to survive in life. And my son was in school at the time, and I'm just trying to figure it all out.
And you were working corporate, which I know we'll talk about in another
Yeah.
time, but you were very high level in corporate at this point.
And I was in a leadership role. I'd gone, corporate, and then I'd moved over to nonprofit, but I was still in leadership. So it was like a corporate job there. And I was raising a lot of money, and it was a very stressful job in so many ways. And I thought that was the way my purpose was, because my coach had me come up with a mission statement for my life. And I knew that my mission was to make an impact on millions of people. And I didn't even know how I was going to do that. But I thought maybe it's through this nonprofit work I'm doing. And then I started getting more and more jobs. But what I realized is, I think that was the kind of that turning point for me to start thinking, I can ask for more in life. But I was still trying to move myself out of the fogginess of being okay with asking for more, because it didn't feel like, I didn't have a very high sense of my own worth. And I still struggle with it sometimes a lot, because if it's been ingrained in you for years and years that you're not worthy, you're not supposed to ask for more, you're supposed to be content with what you have, then it's very hard to shift out of that. And it's moving really from that very fixed mindset that so many of us have grown up in, to move over to more of a growth mindset, which is way more expansive. Everything's possible. And so I hung out in that middle ground for a long time until I really started to say yes to myself. And it's really only been a few years. I think, our coach, Gina, that we both have worked with, she would say that you teach what you want to learn. And I certainly, that's how I've evolved, is I teach and mentor people on what I wanted to learn, because every single thing I do now for other people, I've done for myself.
And I think that's such the beauty of this work, right? Because not being in such like the tribal communities that once were, where women, men, the young would learn from the experience of the older. There would be different gifts that each held, and then you would learn those. And just given evolution, like we don't necessarily live in those types of societies anymore. And so it is the necessary piece, I believe, of teaching the experiences, and we're passing that on.
Yeah. I think just on that note, I think because we've become such a society of individualism, and we tend to do a lot of things on our own. Now, I know a lot of women have women friends and things, but oftentimes we feel very isolated, like nobody else has experienced what we're experiencing. And I think this is to your point, is that actually when you start to talk about these things with other people, you'll learn that a lot of other people understand how you're feeling or what you might be going through. And to be able to share that in a vulnerable way with other women, for me, it opens up a safer space to be able to allow them then to speak about what they're feeling or what their truth might be. And I feel like that's so freeing.
It's that sense of, and I think this is the benefit of having lived a lot of life experience, right? Because I think a lot. Right? And I think why some people have these very colorful, very large, and I don't mean like living large, but like a wide breadth of life experience.
Yes.
And then others may not necessarily have had those. And I believe that when you are doing transformational work, in order to hold people and hold their stories, you have to have lived experience, because especially when Michèle, and I want to have you back on because there's so many different topics I would love just to have your perspective on and have you share your experience on. But part of Michèle's work is working with women who are in a vulnerable place in their life in a transition. And sometimes that's divorce, right? And there's in transformational work, I believe, like there's no place for judgment. There's no place for judgment of any kind. And what I've noticed through my life experience, the more life experiences that you have, the less judgment often you have. And so I think that to make this conversation come full circle, as far as what we were saying, those experiences do help you to be a more understanding sounding board, to be a person that can hold whatever somebody's bringing to you, because a lot of times there is shame and people don't know what to do with that.
Absolutely. I think that's such an important part because it can be so easy to be so judgy.
Yeah.
And having come out of a Catholic family, that is exasperated, I think, in many ways, and
Absolutely.
which is fear-based, we know. And so, yeah, it's really coming from a place of compassion and love, and judgment we can leave at the door or down the block.
Yeah, I like that.
and being able to hold people wherever they are rather than having some false expectation of what things should be. So one of the first words I try to help people eliminate is should. And I just don't know that it has a really good place in our vocabulary. And women going through divorce, it doesn't even matter. I work with highly capable and professional women and stay-at-home moms, and ironically, many women in their 50s and 60s. There's a lot of people going through divorces after 20, 25, 30, 35-year marriages. And then there's an added element to what's happening in their lives through this whole thing. And being able to hold that space for people and to share my experiences so they understand that I get it.
Yes.
And because I think I learned, this is after my divorce, a lot of people, the statistics are many people take up to 7 years before they actually execute on a divorce. It's been harboring around this idea. The little seed was planted. There's been little glimmers of, oh my God, I'm going to kill myself if I have to stay with this man for the rest of my life, for years, oftentimes, before they get to the point where they can actually do the next thing. And my hope is to help people get there. If they're going down that path, either to try to figure it out and fix it before. And if it's not fixable, then find your freedom sooner, because your life matters so much. And the longer you wait, the longer you're going to be in a cage. And I just feel like sometimes it just takes time to get to that point, but there is help out there to help people just start getting clarity around what do you want in your life and what do you really desire, and what do you not need to feel guilty over anymore for wanting something different?
And I think that's I would like on our next conversation us to talk about that, because I do think there is a huge feeling of guilt around wanting something different, especially, this is such an important conversation around the marriages that are like 25, 30 years, women in their late 40s, 50s, 60s, who are like, I want something different. And that stigma over, you should just be happy.
Yeah.
Because look at how old you are. Look at how this, look at how that, you should. And so I want to talk about that and then the guilt piece of it. But before we end this particular conversation, now that you are really living this fully embodied feminine version, divine feminine version of Michèle, what does that mean to you? And it's not that you weren't divine at that point, right? 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when you were in that question. But what does it mean to you to be living in this energy that you are now compared to maybe the more caged in, the words you've been sharing, caged in energy?
What a wonderful and beautiful question. I may have been divine back then, but I certainly didn't know it.
Yeah.
That isn't even how I ever would have considered my life. I think being in this place now is no longer feeling the need to apologize for wanting more than just survival. Choosing to live for me meant freedom in a sense of not that I don't need or want anybody, but it's freedom to be who I truly am.
Yeah.
And if they want me as I am, anybody for that matter, great. Because I'm not going to be everybody's cup of tea, and I don't have to try to be. And I think that is the biggest piece of it, is trying to understand the true me, the true you, and who you really are, what you're meant for. I mean, it's the premise of my whole work, is getting to the heart of who you are and what you're meant for. And when you start to understand what that is, it changes everything, because if you can always anchor back, for me, it means, and this is a constant thing, I'm always working on this, but really trying to always anchor back to what does it mean to look at this through a lens of love rather than a lens of fear. And I know the days that I'm looking at it through a fear-based lens, because that's when I start to freak out and spin or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And when I can get myself back to that place from a love and compassion for myself first, knowing that when I am embodying my own self-love, that I'm giving my whole self to everyone, and it's better for the greater good, if you will. I think for such a long time I was living as I got to be on top kind of a person, and now I want to be part of the collective to make all of us rise.
Michèle, I could just sit here listening to you because it is inspiring and it is beautiful, and your words are important. And I thank you so much for sharing what you shared today. And I really can't wait for our next conversation, because I just believe talking about these things is so important, getting it out, having the conversations. And I just see so many more. So I really want to thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I just love you, and I appreciate you having me on today. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Me as well. So that is it for today with Michèle Heffron. Her information will be in the show notes. Please check out Michèle. Her work is beautiful and important. And remember, come as you are, in your light, in your shadow, in your illicit feminine.